Good day, everyone. I'm Anthony Maddox with the University of Southern California, Russia School of Education, and Viterbi School of Engineering. We'd like to welcome you here wherever you are in the world, and thank you for showing up and hearing the message that we have today. We have two presenters, if you will, and let me ask the first presenter to just say a few words about themselves. Sue Atwell from UK. Sue, you there?
I am. Hi, I'm Stu Atwell. I'm head of EdTech at JISC, and part of my role, we work with universities and colleges across the UK, also with EdTech and looking at new and innovative technologies and services.
Thank you. We very much appreciate you being here and all the way from the UK. Sorry you couldn't join us, but nevertheless, it's really a good opportunity for you to see you. And the next presenter we have is Chibeza Agli. Chibeza, talk a little bit about yourself.
Hello everyone, my name's Jabez Agli and I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Abrism Group Limited, and we're a technology company which is seeking to apply new cutting-edge technologies to the learning space for large organizations.
And myself, part of the what I bring is as the director of the Center for Engineering and Education at USC. We're concerned as a school of education about how to build systems that actually include equity. Equity is our mission at USC. So this particular session will bring out some of those equity issues, and we'll talk a lot about what it means to really understand what Generation Unmute really signifies. And I think we'll get a chance to do that. So let me start with the first question for our panelists. It's the notion of anticipating education needs to develop the right ed tech. Please, for a moment, just expound a little bit on what the right ed tech means. Sue, you want to start us off again?
Okay, from my point of view, and certainly from colleges and universities we've spoken to, the right EdTech is EdTech that enables really good, engaging learning. The pandemic has created a whole move to blended and online, and we have to move away from lift and shift. Students need to be engaged, but that engagement has to change, has to be right for its need. So it's not just about providing one way, but it's about solutions that can offer a multiplicity of ways for students to be engaged in that learning, for that learning to deliver what it needs to do in an authentic and relevant way.
That sounds right as well, because as a science teacher educator at USC, one of the learning plans and systems that we have is called the 5E learning cycle. And one of the first things you have to do is to engage. So we can't assume engagement happens solely because you're there to learn the content, but engagement has to be planned and an activity that is well thought out. And so to hear you say that about engagement is music to my ears, because engaging is what all learners need, no matter what the context. Shabeza, your thoughts about that question?
Yeah, so I think EdTech is a broad term actually, and there's lots of different tools within EdTech. For us, it means using the right EdTech tool for the right purpose, and that is going back to what Sue was saying, an enabler. The reason we use EdTech solutions is to enable us to achieve more than we might without those technologies. So from our side of things, that's how we kind of think about EdTech tools.
And let me ask you a little bit more, Chabeza, about that notion of right. How do we now start to focus in on or converge upon what right is? And is there one right or a lot of different rights?
This is really interesting. So one of the things that we think there's been some limitations in kind of conventional methodologies where a small group of people have often decided what right is. And as we know, all of us in this room and watching online have our own backgrounds and experiences and interests and indeed needs. So what's right for one person might not necessarily be right for another. So at our company, at Abrism, we're trying to look at how we can use technology to provide a less biased, less subjective view of content and information so that we can then form spaces of knowledge which can be experienced differently by in each individual who's then consuming that experience. So that leads us into the idea of personalization.
And so let me just also ask you that same question. With your experience at JISC and your experience in the field, what do you define right as being, either declaratively or procedurally?
Um, I think I would say that the institutions who've got this right in the best way
Mm-hmm.
are those that have consulted with students and included those students in their decision process.
Mm-hmm.
So some universities, some colleges, as you say, they make the decisions, but the ones who have the best solutions, the most engagement, are the ones where the students have been part of that process either in deciding what they want or looking at potential solutions and helping refine it down.
And so, what we're encouraging our audience and our viewers to do is to actually take the effort and invest in finding out what right is. And if you cannot personalize, then the right possibly can be for a particular group. It can actually support equity. It can support local kinds of considerations in politics. So the notion of right is local and it changes. That's what I'm hearing, right? And there is no one right, but actually the investment to find out what right is actually what we're asking people to do for sure. That sounds right, if you will, listening to both of you talk about that. One other thing that I want to bring up here for both of you to consider, and bear with me for a moment. COVID has accelerated change and opens the doors to transformation. No one expected this. And as a teacher educator, my students and my teacher candidates have experienced that hybridity. I have experienced hybridity. In fact, I've had my students take a class that was never meant to be hybrid and turn it into a hybrid class because we told them, hey, don't come if you're not feeling well. So you wonder sometimes if students actually feel okay, whatever that means, but still decide not to come because it's online. So, Chibeza, what does that notion of transformation mean, and how did COVID accelerate what happened to us, if you will?
Well, it's a really, obviously, unprecedented times. I'll use that word first, that we've seen as a result of COVID, and it has been an accelerant to those of us working in EdTech. I mean, those who are already preparing for digital solutions and indeed making companies and actually building EdTech solutions, even we weren't really ready for what we would see with COVID. Necessity is the mother of invention, and I think what it's done is it's forced us all to be innovators, students, teachers, EdTech professionals, and to look at the idea of learning online in new ways and at scale and a speed that has been unimaginable before. So it's driven, what we've seen is there's an appetite for teachers, universities, companies to start engaging with technology where they may have been slightly more resistant to the idea previously. So we've seen an open door to the idea of actually implementing technology in classrooms and in the workplace, which has been fantastic because it's enabled EdTech providers to grow and to refine and improve their solutions. And in turn, that circles back round and benefits their companies, economies, learners, and that we've seen. So that's been a very positive outcome, that ability to iterate faster and to bring technology into organizations which may have got there eventually, but maybe it would have taken another 5 or 6 years or so.
Appreciate that. And Sue, you're shaking your head, so you hear some resonance there. Talk to us about what you hear in that question and what you hear in Chibeza's commentary.
I very much agree. I think COVID has really accelerated the adoption of technology in order to deliver what needed to be delivered. And I think that's had kind of two repercussions, really. I think one is a really positive one in that a lot of surveys have really come up with the result that disabled students have finally got the service and the requests they've been making. They felt futilely for several years, and now it feels like they have a really good service and feel equal, that they're getting the education on an equal footing with other students. And also the number of students that are taking advantage of those accessibility features, whether or not they legally need them, they are using them because they find they help their study. And that has to be a positive. I think one of the things that's starting to happen now is that a lot of institutions brought in quite a few EdTech solutions, some of them on a kind of piecemeal basis in faculty-wide or even just program or lesson-wide. And what they're now trying to do is to come up with a ecosystem that works for their institution, that delivers learning the way they want to deliver learning in the future. But it's going to be a technological solution that's helping that learning go forwards. So there's no going back.
And I'm going to ask you once at this time, to kind of dig a little bit deeper on the notion of a solution, right? Because I hear that a lot in the EdTech space. Solution this, solution that. But with this particular phenomenon, aren't the notions of solutions changing, and is something happening? Talk to us.
Yeah, so what a lot of institutions are looking for really is a kind of what they call an ecosystem that they can plug and play, so they can swap out modules. So where something's working, they'll keep it. Where something's not quite delivering or no longer delivering, or they've changed what they do and the product isn't changing with them, they want to be able to swap it out and bring another. So what institutions are looking at are solutions that work together so that they can have a package. They know that one solution will not solve all their problems. It's never going to. But traditionally, things don't play well with each other. And I think that's where they're looking for the market to change.
It makes sense. Chibeza, solutions?
Yeah, I completely agree with what Sue was saying there. So we're really seeing a strong shift in organizations going from using one kind of monolithic LMS system or otherwise to wanting to build a collection of tools, right tool for the right job. And that's an exciting thing for new providers entering into the market, new startups, new innovators to produce quite specific solutions to specific problems. And when you do that, you enable those creators to focus on doing a really, really good job at answering their specific issue. Whereas before, you tended to see systems which were trying to be everything. And whenever you're trying to be everything, you can't necessarily be excellent at delivering on each of those components. So I completely agree, and I'd like to see more of that, more of the ability to build ecosystems. And just to finally agree again with Sue is that it's up to us as creators, as people that are building solutions, to start working out how we can integrate and play together nicely so that we can all benefit.
And so it seems like we've asked the end user to change, right? To adopt the technologies, to use them however we create them. But let me ask a question about the notion of the providers, EdTech. How will this wormhole change how EdTech responds to the needs along the way? Sue?
I think it's probably going to be split. I think some of the bigger providers do seem to have the mindset that this is their system, it solves all problems, and it will be great. Just adopt it and continue to buy from them, and everything will be fine, providing you don't want to change. I think the ones that really want to run with this are going to start innovating, they're going to start engaging, they're going to start working with institutions to make sure what they're delivering is what's needed.
And how will you just work with providers and work with EdTech solution providers to kind of address what you just said? What specifically do you think will happen, or what will you do?
So we've just kicked off a new program actually called our EdTech program, and we're looking specifically to do that. So to aggregate problems from our members, to really work with them together to get the problem brief nailed, and then identify providers that are happy to work in a co-design way where they might have to make changes to their system, their product, in order to deliver what's needed. But benefits for both. You know, they gain by having a product that the sector needs. If the sector needs it, the sector will buy it.
And that means that there's a kind of a participatory design in the process. In other words, more voices of the actual persons who are engaged in experiencing the educational quote-unquote disruption that need to be part of the process. And that's what's being signaled, like I said, by COVID and other kinds of changes along the way. Chibeza, agreed?
Yeah, I do agree. And I would only add that, what we've seen so far is the ability for providers to do a bit of a cut and paste from traditional models and get those online and be relatively successful. And we needed the scale, so those providers come in first and give us the scale. But as we go forward, it's going to be the innovators and the producers of real deep technology that are really targeting some of those pain points that we have going into the future of work and the future of learning that are going to ultimately, I hope, deliver most value over the long term.
And you know, this conference is about Generation Unmute. So listening to those who are using, or stakeholders to those who are using the technologies, are critical here. So let me ask you a question. How will you unmute? How will you recognize that the generation is unmuted? Their voices and TikTok and Instagram and Twitter and every place else are resonating. This has to somehow provide, yes, that's not just user-centered design and participatory design, but something else. Thoughts, Chibeza?
Well, we're as a technology company, we're working with cutting edge technologies like machine learning and AI, and we're in many ways trying to help build automation into the process. But what we don't want to lose is the learner voice and the learner participation and that magic that involves them in the process. So we've been really conscious to involve collaborative opportunities for students to develop things like assessments for themselves and their peers, and then to use technology to bring that together, so that we've got a collaboration between person and machine together. And that's where what we're really excited about. One of the things that a Prism does is also predict journeys through spaces of content. But even though we tell people this is probably the most efficient route for you in order to achieve these certain kind of competency or skill-based outcomes, you have the option to explore this space at any time, whenever your curiosity takes you. Because curiosity, motivation, confidence have huge impacts on what learners gain from the system. So we want to unmute people through giving them the ability to be curious, to contribute, to mention and say things about their learning.
And Sue, how will you participate in the process, or just participate in this notion of unmuting? How will you take advantage of that? How will you reflect that in your offerings and what you do?
I think for us, obviously, as we're a kind of intermediary company, we don't deal directly with students unless we're consulting with them or something. But part of our role is to share, to promote good practice to our members, and good practice is to bring the students in on the decisions. But also, interestingly, a lot of our members are already talking about how they can create space for both their students and their staff to explore things, because that exploration, as has already been mentioned, is key. It's not just, you can use this to do this. It's students and staff, if they can understand the whole of the thing, even if it's not necessarily relevant to them in the day-to-day, their confidence grows and they're much more likely to use things and engage.
And at USC, in the Rasir School of Education, what we've noticed is that the traditional student or teacher education simply has to change. And what we believe is happening is that the integration of multidisciplinary approaches of engineering, education, and entrepreneurship can come together, with at the top of the pyramid that being equity. So in other words, how we now can look at various ways of doing business, and that technology is not just about bits or bytes. It's about leveraging phenomena. And the phenomena is around learning, social behavioral phenomena, and possibly even artificial phenomena such as computational sciences, or the things like the design sciences. Those type of things are coming into play. And our students know that. Our stakeholders know that. And so now sending that message that we know that, and that we're willing to not only involve them, but to create artifacts that reflect that mindset, seems to be paramount along the way. That's what Generation Unmute is. And I think, again, even though, Sue, you might not directly interface with students, those around you really do know and understand that. So that's really great. Question for both of you. Two areas that require particular attention to what's going on, and from your perspectives as it relates to this particular topic. Two areas. Trapeza?
I would say two areas: assessment and measurement, and individualization are two areas which I think are really interesting.
Sue?
I totally agree. I think you've nailed it there. Assessment is really key. It's not just how we assess, but it's, we need to revisit what we assess, make sure we're only assessing what needs to be assessing, rather than constantly assessing, make it authentic and relevant to the real world. And personalisation. Students, one size has never fit all, and it's becoming more and more evident.
And so how do we've mentioned this before in this discussion, right? Personalization and assessment. How do we get to that? That's a tremendously difficult problem and task. So any insight on how not only you, but those around you, those who listen to your voices, those who respond to you, may be able to address some of these difficult issues. Sue, what do you think?
There's been many good practices during the pandemic. So people have moved to different ways of assessment. They've very much focused down on what they really need to assess, rather than the amount of assessments they were doing beforehand. That's been a really positive result of COVID. But I think people have considered other modes. So they've not just moved exams online and necessarily gone through things like proctoring. They have thought about what needs to be assessed and how that can be assessed. So they've moved to, longer exams with an open book, which actually does reflect the real world. I mean, who sits there and does their job without referring to the outside world? No, none of us. Um, but also, some of them have offered choice as well. So, for example, Edinburgh Engineering, they actually offered their students a choice of how they wanted to be assessed and left it totally to them. They gave them the options, and the students were individually assessed in the way they preferred and that worked for them.
Assessment by choice. That's a kind of unmuting, I think, that we have not seen in education at any level. K-12, secondary, higher education. We haven't seen it all. You agree?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I think, again, to add in here, that we're really interested in the idea that you can use assessments. Assessments are often seen quite negatively in the current context. And can we turn assessments into the learning process? And can we use those formatively to add and to measure processes as we go? Because that allows us to be a lot more brave in our delivery models. As long as we know whether it's working and how we're achieving the kind of outcomes and the knowledge and skills that we want to impart to our learners, then we can go a lot further, we can go a lot faster, and we can cover more ground. And we can do exciting things, as you mentioned, Anthony, in looking at interdisciplinary knowledge spaces rather than siloed courses.
So then what's going right with EdTech? Let's end with that major question. Because EdTech is doing so many wonderful things all around the world. What's going right with EdTech from your
It's
perspective?
a tremendous opportunity for reach and scale. I mean, that has to be mentioned, that we can now reach farther than we were able to with traditional methodologies. So that is really important. We have also the opportunity to, again, develop different tools for different things, so we can curate bases of knowledge. Human beings can't read a whole library in a day and pull out interesting bits of information, but we can use technology to help us to do that. And then we can have a go at improving personalization and individualization, proper personalization. So not just recommending another course after you've finished one. Really, to give an individual what they need to address their knowledge and skills gaps and develop as an individual and as a person to achieve a goal which is important to them. We've got the opportunity to pair up with technology like we've always done, and get a really successful outcome and an enjoyable outcome.
As a term, proper personalization, we need to remember what that means and what that is. Sue, what about you? What do you think is going right with EdTech, and what are the wonderful things they've done? Your perspective, where are we headed?
I think we're at the start of a really exciting journey. We've started with some solutions that are working on helping the teachers to engage their students, but we need to take it further than that. We need to think about how we keep those students engaged and motivated, and importantly, how we continue to challenge those students. A lot of students need the challenge in order to achieve their best. It's easy sometimes, and I think more easy with technology, to help the students to achieve and forget the challenge element. Um, and sometimes, that challenge is the crucial thing that just takes the students to the next level. And I think it really is a chance to bring equity. If people take the opportunity to design for all when they're thinking of solutions, then you really are going to have a service that works for everybody and gives them that equity. They won't have to make special requests and feel apart. It'll just be there, and that's the way it should be.
It should be that way. The Deloitte had a survey recently, 2019, of millennials as well as Gen Z. The major issue they touted was climate. So maybe that's a message for us. That one of the things that makes EdTech right is to actually bring in the kind of concerns of the learner that maybe even beyond education, it's how they survive. It's a health, housing, employment, education, and safety as part of that mix. So EdTech then starts to be a more generalized way of dealing with learning around, and so EdTech has an opportunity to also mine that space at the same time. So that's an opportunity for us going forward. I think it's an opportunity for us to do new and different kinds of things, to involve different kinds of players in the mix, and the new technologies that will develop. You're talking about AI. If AI has the agency that we think it needs to actually support personalized learning, then there it is. And so in a way, the two of you have been able to provide a little bit of insight, I think, an important insight to that particular community, into how we should go forward and build the systems that our future learners will need. I thank you both for your time and effort and being part of this particular panel. We're here at WISE. Again, we thank also all of our viewers, and take care.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.